The body was found approximately 8 feet over the bank. Her skirt seemed to be either ripped off or had come off during the process of what had taken place, the process of a murder. There's no signs of sexual contact, sexual assault. All we know is she's dead, died violently, and we don't know why. We've certainly had inquiries and what have you, but there's just nothing.
On the morning of July 15th, 1982, a gravedigger was working when he discovered the badly decomposing body of a woman in the rear of Cedar Ridge Cemetery in Blairstown, New Jersey. The body was lying on its back, just over a steep bank leading to a creek below. The victim's face had been beaten beyond recognition with a yet-to-be-determined object. Due to the significant decomposition of her body, her eye color could not be discerned. The body was clad in a red short-sleeved shirt, while a peasant-style skirt lay on top of the victim's legs, but no underwear was found. The level of decay made it difficult to find conclusive evidence of a sexual assault. A golden cross necklace was tangled in the victim's hair. 2 earrings adorned her left ear. Red nail polish was found on the right hand, but not the left. There were no traces of any surgical scars, distinct birthmarks, or tattoos. Her front 2 teeth were darker than the rest. No signs of assault were found. Forensic anthropologists determined that the victim was 14 to 18 years of age and had never been pregnant or given birth. Toxicology did not reveal any traces of drugs, but the report was not entirely conclusive because so much time had elapsed between her death and the discovery of the body. The autopsy revealed that the body was discovered after days or possibly even weeks of exposure to the natural elements. The hot and humid weather conditions made it more difficult for the forensic department to determine the specifics surrounding the time of death. Trauma on the arms of the victim revealed that she had attempted to fight back against the attacker. On January 22, 1983, Jane Doe was given a proper burial. Sadly, though, no family members were present at her funeral as her identity remained a mystery. Moved by the tragic story of this poor young woman, the townspeople donated the cost of the victim's coffin, headstone, and burial plot. Princess Doe, missing from home, dead among strangers, remembered by all, were the heartbreaking markings on the tombstone. There was a possible sighting of Princess Doe before her murder. In an attempt to find information about this unidentified victim, detailed pictures of her clothing were shared with the public. After seeing images of the clothing in a newspaper, a woman reported to officials that she remembered seeing a girl wearing the same clothing purchasing cigarettes on July 13, 1982, just 2 days before her body was found. However, like several others, this lead led nowhere. On June 30, 1983, Princess Doe became the first person to be entered into the FBI's National Computerized Unidentified Deceased Files. Through the years, the focus was shifted to many suspects, ranging from local residents to serial killers. However, all of them were eventually cleared, and frustratingly, police were back at square one. For many years, Princess Doe was wrongly thought to be Diane Janice Dye, a missing teenager from San Jose, California, who vanished on July 30, 1979. This theory held court with several law enforcement officials in the state of New Jersey, who went so far as to declare Diane Dye as Princess Doe in a press conference. However, Lieutenant Eric Kranz, Princess Doe case's original lead investigator, maintained that Diane Dye was not a plausible candidate for Princess Doe's identity. Kranz's insights were backed up by Diane's family and the investigators in California, who were disgusted by the conduct of the New Jersey law enforcement. In 2003, Princess Doe's DNA was compared with a DNA sample from Diane's mother, Patricia, and it was conclusively determined that Diana Dye was not Princess Doe. In 2005, a convicted serial killer named Arthur Kinlaw wrote a letter to the police expressing his desire to confess to another murder. According to the New York Times, Kinlaw had previously been charged with killing and dumping a girl's body in the East River. In 2005, Kinlaw, whom the police believed had run a prostitution ring in the past, wanted to tell the investigators about a young woman he had murdered in New Jersey. However, Kinlaw's claims couldn't be corroborated by the police due to a lack of substantial evidence at that time. Though investigators had collected DNA evidence from Princess Doe's body, it was only in recent years that they were able to test her earthly remains. In 2007, the body was exhumed, and the University of North Texas Center for Human Identification analyzed the skeletal remains of Princess Doe. In 2012, a composite sketch was made to identify Princess Doe using DNA technologies, but it didn't lead to any new information. Then, in 2021, the Astrea Forensics Lab analyzed DNA from her teeth and eyelashes, and were successfully able to extract DNA from those samples, which were initially thought to be of no value. Indeed, Princess Doe's eyelashes and teeth were the keys to discovering her identity. After the first clue was grasped, other details started filling in. In 2022, investigators were able to finally identify Princess Doe as Dawn Olanick, a 17-year-old Long Island resident. Princess Doe's 40th anniversary was the day marked for the announcement of her identification. Dawn Olanick was born in a Christian home on August 5, 1964 in West Babylon, New York. In 1982, 17-year-old Dawn was a high school junior living with her mother and sister in Bohemia, New York. She left home on June 24, 1982 at her mother's request. The mother wanted Olanick out of the house. The reason why has never been clarified, and she was never seen alive again. Detectives believe that after leaving her home, somewhere, somehow, Dawn had crossed paths with Arthur Kinlaw. Kinlaw then tried to force her into sex work for a prostitution ring that he and his wife Donna ran in Suffolk County, New York throughout the 1980s. When she refused, he killed her in an attempt to get rid of a witness. Following the identification of Princess Doe as Dawn Olanick, Arthur Kinlaw was reconsidered as a suspect and later charged with Olanick's murder. If convicted, he will be facing another life sentence, along with the 2 he is already serving. For 40 years, law enforcement has not given up on Princess Doe. Warren County prosecutor James Pfeiffer stated in a news conference. He added that science and technology played crucial parts in solving Olanick's murder. Olanick's surviving relatives sat with her photo pinned to their lapels at the press conference. For over 40 years, Dawn had been resting in a grave in the town of Blairstone, New Jersey. Now her family is deciding whether or not she should stay in New Jersey or come home to New York. Whatever their decision might be, investigators are relieved to finally have identified her and given Dawn Olanick her identity back. In the era of DNA advancements, victims deserve much more than a gravestone with no name on it. Hopefully in the future, no family will have to live their lives wondering about their lost loved ones. On July 31, 1960, a school teacher from Las Vegas named Russell Allen was looking for rocks to decorate his garden in a desert area near Congress, Arizona, just off of Old Alamo Road, 1.5 miles from Highway 93. After just a few moments, he stumbled upon something so horrific that would haunt him for decades. In the creek bed of Sandwash, a little girl's badly decomposing, partially buried body was concealed. He wasted no time in notifying the authorities. As local police reached the scene, they found the body wearing a blue blouse and reddish shorts. The adult-sized rubber thong sandals that she was wearing were cut down to fit her feet, and leather straps fastened the sandals. Her perfect set of baby teeth remained intact. Her toenails and fingernails were painted bright red. There were no signs of fractured or broken bones, which ruled out the history of abuse, suggesting that this was a random attack. The remains were, however, charred. Detectives believe that the perpetrator tried to dispose of her body by burning it, but could not entirely accomplish the task. He then changed his plan and buried the body in the desert, but did not do a very good job of that either. An autopsy concluded that the body belonged to a child. The investigators estimated that the little girl was in the age range of 2 to 7 years, with an approximate height of 3 feet 5 inches. She weighed between 50 and 60 pounds. She was Caucasian and had brown hair, but it could have been previously tinted or dyed auburn. However, no one could tell if she had any birthmarks or distinctive spots on her body due to extreme decomposition and charring. Her cause of death could not be determined, but officials considered this case a homicide based on the circumstances. It was a tragic case all around. Not only did the killer get away even after such a monstrous act, but nobody even knew who this poor child was. However, people in the nearby Prescott community did their best to honor her. Residents in the nearby central North Arizona community of Prescott raised money for a funeral and even arranged florists. A local mortuary donated its services for the little girl they lovingly dubbed Little Miss Nobody, since nobody came forward to identify her. There was a lot of coverage from the media on this case in the first month of the gruesome discovery, but there were no leads to follow. Although the local sheriff's department continued their search for months, even interrogating every child sex offender in that area, yet nothing ever came of it. The case went cold as every clue turned out to be a dead end. Throughout the years, many desperate families came to the sheriff's department asking if she was their missing child, but none were a match. Then, in 2021, the Yavapai County Sheriff's Office partnered with Othram, a Texas-based laboratory, to see if advanced DNA testing could help solve the mystery of Little Miss Nobody. Although the preserved evidence was not strong enough for reconstruction and building a DNA profile, with improved technology, the lab built a DNA profile that had not been possible in the past. Indeed, the lab returned the identity to authorities in February 2022, and the mystery surrounding a little girl's identity was finally solved after 6 decades. Little Miss Nobody was 4-year-old Sharon Lee Gallegos. She was born on September 6, 1955. With her mother, grandmother, and 6 other relatives, Sharon and her 2 older siblings lived in Alamogordo. She had no contact with her soldier father since he left the family when Sharon was a baby. The Gallegos were not wealthy, but the love was unconditional in this tight-knit family. Her loved ones described Sharon as a happy-go-lucky child who loved running errands with her mother and enjoyed playing outside with the neighborhood kids along with her siblings. At approximately 3 p.m. on July 21, 1960, Sharon was kidnapped in an alley near her Virginia Avenue home while playing with her 2 cousins. The eyewitnesses said a couple offered to buy Sharon some candy and clothes in exchange for getting in the car with them. Sharon refused, but was dragged to the vehicle anyway. The car was described as a dark green 1951 or 1952 model Dodge or Plymouth sedan. The man was described as a fair, thin Caucasian with a long nose and sandy-colored straight hair, whereas the witnesses described the woman as a short, stout individual in her 30s. After loading Sharon into the car, the vehicle sped away. Once her cousins told Sharon's mom about what happened, she immediately called the police. Roadblocks were set up in nearby places, but failed to apprehend the abductor. Investigators were concerned that Sharon was probably stalked for days or weeks before the abduction, but could not find out the perpetrators. Shockingly, in 1960, Sharon was not considered to be Little Miss Nobody because the remains looked much older than Sharon. This case was always open until the identification of Little Miss Nobody. Sadly, Sharon's parents passed away before the mystery was solved. Regardless, the surviving family members of Sharon were relieved to know that she had been found. Unfortunately, no new information on her killer has surfaced. On June 3, 1993, a trucker stopped to relieve himself on the side of the westbound State Route 152, also known as the Pacheco Pass Highway near Gilroy, California, when something grabbed his attention. It looked like the partially skeletal remains of a human body. After authorities reached the scene, they found a decomposing female body wearing blue jeans and a blue t-shirt with a blue jacket. She had white underwear and white Nike socks with blue stripes. Her brown tennis shoes were also recovered from the scene. After the body was taken to the coroner's office for an autopsy, many details about the victim's description and her murder were revealed. The forensic scientists concluded that the body belonged to a white woman, but she also had Hispanic characteristics. She was in her late 30s or early 40s at the time of her death, most likely at the end of May 1993. She featured medium-length brown hair with brown eyes. At about 5 feet 2 inches tall, she weighed around 130 pounds. The 5-inch scar was found on her abdomen, possibly resulting from gallbladder surgery. She also had track marks across her arm indicating drug abuse. The manner of death was ruled a homicide by strangulation, and the body seemed to have been dumped after the murder. Even with all of these details, detectives faced difficulty finding out who this woman was. She did not match any missing persons in the area. No one came forward to claim her, nor could detectives connect any of the evidence to any person. Eventually, they started referring to her as the Blue Pacheco Jane Doe. The case went cold soon after the murder. Then, in 2006, Keith Hunter Jesperson, otherwise known as the infamous Happy Face Killer, submitted a letter to the Santa Clara County District Attorney's Office admitting to sexually assaulting and killing an unknown female along the dirt turnout on Highway 152. Between 1990 and 1995, Jesperson strangled 8 women, including prostitutes and transients in several U.S. states, such as California, Florida, Nebraska, Oregon, Washington, and Wyoming. He is currently incarcerated at the Oregon State Penitentiary. He was known as the Happy Face Killer due to the happy face drawing he always included in his letters taunting the police. Jesperson added significant details of the murder in his letter to authorities. He claimed he met her at a truck stop on Interstate 5 in Corning, California, and offered her a ride after buying her lunch. During the ride, the woman talked about having relatives in the Sacramento, California area. Jesperson believed she might have been a prostitute. In Williams, California, they engaged in sexual activities, and then he strangled her before driving on toward Gilroy, California. Several hours later, he stopped at the Pacheco Pass on Highway 152 and tossed her body off the turnout. Although he mentioned her name being Cindy or Carla, he too had no idea about her true identity. A year after this confession, he pled guilty to her murder and received a life sentence. It was the rarest of situations where authorities had a convict behind bars without identification of the victim. Blue Pacheco Jane Doe remained one of 3 unidentified victims of the Happy Face serial killer for decades. In 2019, detectives from the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office began utilizing the new DNA technology advancements in an attempt to identify Blue Pacheco Jane Doe, while partnering with the nonprofit DNA Doe Project. Finally, in April 2022, she was discovered to be Patricia Skiple from Colton, Oregon. Patricia Skiple was born May 29, 1948, and grew up in Colton, Oregon. Patsy, as she preferred to be called, was a mother of 2 and a resident of Oregon. She was described as a gentlewoman who loved her family more than anything. In 1992, she left her home and also the city in the middle of the night after an argument with her husband. She never returned. For years, Patsy's family wondered where she was and if she'd ever come home. It was only after detectives paid a visit to Patsy's family saying that she was identified that they came to know her fate. We can only hope that they heal, knowing that justice was served for Patsy. In the late morning hours of June 16, 1974, a man was searching for driftwood with his two teenage sons in a condensed wooded area of Singer Island in North Palm Beach, Florida. The trio was combing through the area along the eastern edge of the Intracoastal Waterway, just 2 miles south of Lost Tree Village, when they came across what looked like skeletal remains. Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office investigators soon reached the area to discover a gruesome scene. The remains appeared to be tied to a tree. Amongst the bones, they found mostly deteriorated clothing, including a black knit pullover sweater that was trimmed at the bottom, a gray waistband, and long gray sleeves that were capped at the shoulders, and size 5 yellow panties with yellow stripes. Denim material was also discovered at the scene, which was believed to have originated from a pair of denim high crop shorts. The partial remains were brought in for examination. The remains were in such bad condition that the medical examiner could not determine the cause of death in the autopsy. Although holes in the sweater indicated gunshot wounds, however, no bullet casings were found at the scene. There were definite signs that animal activity had scattered the remains. The medical examiner concluded that the remains belonged to a white female between the ages of 14 and 25. She weighed approximately 83 to 103 pounds and stood anywhere from 4 feet 11 inches to 5 feet 2 inches. She most likely had blonde hair with a red tint to it. Due to the level of decomposition at the time of her discovery, her eye color could not be determined. Regardless of that, an abstract profile of the victim was created. When media reports first came out, the Singer Island Jane Doe was believed to be Bonnie Robinson, a young girl who had gone missing from Detroit, Michigan. Yet upon further investigation, this theory was ruled out. Over the years, many attempts were made to identify the young girl. Then, in April of 2014, her body was exhumed to collect more physical evidence. In 2015, a DNA profile was developed, but there was no match in CODIS, suggesting that the girl likely had no criminal history. After developing a DNA profile, several other missing women were able to be ruled out through DNA comparison. In 2019, the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office prepared a new facial reconstruction of the girl, but no one came forward with any leads. Finally, in December 2021, the DNA was sent to a genealogy lab to comb through genetic databases and try to develop a family tree based on the recovered DNA. In March 2022, the ancestry was successfully traced, leading to the identification of distant relatives of Singer Island Jane Doe. After relentless efforts, the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office was able to contact potential family members. Additional DNA testing of surviving family members confirmed Jane Doe's identity as 15-year-old Suzanne Poole. Susan Poole was born February 12, 1957. She lived in a trailer park with her family in Fort Lauderdale. The 15-year-old went missing from Broward County, Florida in December of 1972. Susan was a troubled teen. On many previous occasions, she ran away from home. She often hitched rides with strangers, which was common in those days, so her family was not initially alarmed when she went missing in 1972, believing she had left voluntarily and would soon return home as she normally did. Susan was never heard from or seen again. As decades passed, her family members always wondered whether or not she had left of her own volition. The only possessions Susan left behind were some clothing and her pocketbook, which was later discovered at her friend's home. It would take over 5 decades to put all the clues together to what happened to Susan Poole. The saddest part of this is despite getting her identity back 50 years after her tragic demise, her parents did not live long enough to see this day. There are still no leads as to who her killer was. On July 10, 1991, the staff of the Whitehall Motel in El Dorado, Arkansas, heard a gunshot from room 121. Moments later, a man was seen fleeing the scene with a gun in his hand. While people at the hotel called 911, the man ran to the parking lot and sped away in a car. When police entered the room, they discovered a deceased woman with a gunshot wound to the head. She was between 5 feet 10 inches and 5 feet 11 inches and weighed 162 pounds. The victim was a Caucasian woman between the ages of 18 and 30. She had blue eyes and about 9-inch long brown hair, which had been dyed blonde previously. She wore a white t-shirt, acid-washed jeans with a black belt, white tennis shoes with white ankle socks, and a gold-colored chain bracelet on her right arm. As a distinctive identification, she had a birthmark under her left breast. She had freckles, 2 piercings in her left ear, and 3 piercings in her right ear. Bruises were found on her right eye and left wrist, suggesting that she most likely was battered and abused before her death. An identification card was discovered along with the body with the victim's photo and the name Cheryl Ann Wick. Yet, after authorities tracked down the real Cheryl Ann Wick, who was very much alive, authorities realized the victim was not Cheryl. Nor was she Mercedes, Cheryl Kaufman, Kelly Lee Carr, Shannon, or Sharon Wiley, all aliases she used while she was alive. Although police found many of her friends, nobody knew her real identity. Ultimately, she was named the Dorado Jane Doe. Soon, police apprehended the killer, James McAlphin, the victim's ex-boyfriend and occasional pimp, and charged him with first-degree murder and second-degree battery. Jane Doe met McAlphin shortly after she had moved to Dallas. However, the relationship was rocky from the start, and abuse was a constant factor. Throughout her relationship, she was in and out of the emergency room to treat the injuries inflicted by her boyfriend. The situation deteriorated so quickly that even the local police, along with her friends, tried to get her out of the relationship. That effort was successful when in June 1991, Jane Doe left McAlphin despite his repeated threats to kill her. Jane Doe then went to live at a friend's apartment. McAlphin's threats continued after he learned that she was seeing someone else. Despite the threats, Jane Doe finally met with McAlphin after he called, promising her money. They set up a meeting at the Whitehall Motel. Her friends warned her not to go, but she went anyway. She said she needed the money to send presents to her children. It was revealed that the argument started right after Jane Doe entered the motel room, where McAlphin was already there waiting for her. She ran out of the door at some point, but he chased her to the parking lot and dragged her back to the room. Moments after a gunshot was heard, McAlphin then fled the scene. McAlphin's version of events was a bit different, though. He claimed that she snatched the gun from him and shot herself. He then fled, fearing that he would be blamed. For obvious reasons, the jury did not buy his story. McAlphin ended up accepting a plea deal for second-degree murder and was sentenced to 15 years for the crime. In all of this chaos, one thing remained unchanged: the confusion regarding Jane Doe's identity. Who was she? After McAlphin's arrest, police hoped to unravel the victim's identity, but he declined to reveal anything without money in exchange for information. However, detectives believe that McAlphin had no idea about her true identity since he knew her as Mercedes. A Bible was also found in Doe's possession that contained several names of the Stroud family. When police reached the Stroud family, they were convinced that Jane Doe was not related to this family since they were African American and she was white. However, she had lived with them for some time in mid to late 1990 under the name Cheryl Ann Wick, a runaway from Louisiana who had just moved there from Minneapolis, Minnesota. A bit more information came to light after the police dug deeper. While staying in Dallas, Jane Doe worked at a local KFC full-time, but occasionally engaged in prostitution to pay her bills. Between 1990 and 1991, she was arrested 4 times for different charges, including prostitution, public lewdness, and writing bad checks, each under the name Cheryl Ann Wick. Although police had reconstructed some of Jane Doe's movements before her death, unmasking her identity seemed an impossible task, considering she told numerous different stories to different people. To some people, she said that she used to be a stripper, was from out of town, and had 2 kids raised by her mother, with whom she did not get along. To others, she had said she was in the witness protection program, and that her father was in the mafia. Some had heard that she was wanted for bank robberies on the East Coast. There were even rumors of her being on the run for the murder of a truck driver. But none of these could be proven as a fact, and she remained the Dorado Jane Doe for decades. This case is very bizarre considering, unlike most other Jane Doe cases, authorities had real-life photos of the victim, her killer behind bars, and people knew her before her death. The only puzzle piece missing was her true identity. In 2019, Yolanda McClary, a genealogy researcher and crime scene investigator, approached local law enforcement with her team to help identify Jane Doe. After several search efforts and DNA profile work, Yolanda and her team were finally able to track down a distant cousin using GED match. From there, they were able to reconstruct a family tree. After more than 30 years in 2022, Dorado Jane Doe's real identity was finally made known. The woman was identified as Kelly, whose last name is kept hidden to respect her family's privacy. In 1968, Kelly was born in Virginia to a woman named Brenda. She grew up knowing her stepfather as a father figure because her biological father had no idea she even existed. Kelly had one younger sister. Soon, Brenda divorced her then husband, and she remarried 2 more times after that. After 3 failed marriages, Brenda moved to Virginia Beach, and Kelly and her sister went to live with her aunt. After about a year, Kelly came back to stay with her mother. At this time, she dropped out of school in 10th grade and began working at a beach jewelry kiosk. By this time, Brenda had developed a drug addiction and a penchant for stealing. In 1986, at the age of 18, she moved to Little Rock. She would spend roughly 3 years in the city, leaving in 1989. Kelly grew closer with her younger sister after moving to Florida in 1989, even briefly moving her sister in with her during her stint in Florida. From there, the 2 sisters went their separate ways when Kelly moved to Virginia in 1990, followed by Texas in 1991. Later that same year, Kelly eventually moved to El Dorado. This is where she spent the rest of her life until her ex-boyfriend murdered her on July 10, 1991. Throughout these relocations, Kelly used several fake names to conceal her identity. Although Brenda did not seem to care about her daughter, the sister tried to find Kelly and always wondered where she was, although nobody formally reported her missing. Despite all the confusion surrounding Kelly's true identity, genetic scientists have once again managed to unravel the mystery. So let us know your thoughts on our list of 5 Jane Doe cases that were solved in 2022 in the comments section. Do not forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more captivating stories like this.